Okay. I think the live stream is on. Okay. Hello, everybody. Welcome to tonight's episode. Tonight's episode is a very unique one. And it is in some sense my personal commentary on the depth of the mystery of memory. Now, memory doesn't seem to be that mysterious because the memories we remember, we remember. But there are, how would I say it? It's as if we have this impression that our okay. We have this impression that memory is accumulated language and images of various other moments. So we're this sort of kind of creature. Now, in other talks, I've spoken about the subjective evolution and whatnot. I'm not going to get into it as deeply, but I'm going to explain to you in some sense that we became conscious. When we became conscious, we became creatures that started recording their moments. Pretty much, we became aware that we came from somewhere and we're going to somewhere. You see, the concept of purpose, a human being wonders about purpose. Purpose is something that it took us billions of years to conceive. And eventually we have reached a point where most people look at life and they're like, what is the purpose? What is the purpose of a rock floating in empty space? What is the purpose of existential manifest phenomena? These questions are deep because they take you beyond your knowledge. However, they're useful. My experience with my state of mind was first ideological. That means it was physical, of course. Like, I consider myself a physical being. But this physicalness of mine was being kept in a sort of journey dynamic. When I understood that the mind functions through journeys, what that means is, in some sense, your mind remembers journeys well. If I tell you about different, if I ask you if you on about, I don't know, different journey, vacations you've gone or trips you've gone, you tend to remember journeys. You tend to remember stuff that started in some sense. You went through a sort of change and you came to a sort of conclusion because you keep the whole thing in your awareness. Okay, it's kind of like drawing a painting from scratch, and the last drop of paint is the finale of it, and then that painting is memorable to the artist in a way where it's as if it uh, the person was there in every moment of its existence, in every moment of its creation. So pretty much we have been present in every moment that we have walked through. However, as we go on to different moments, that moment kind of echoes. It echoes in our subconscious as a sort of kind of like chronological memory structure. Now, what meditation is concentration on the images of life. And first you begin concentrating on the external images, and once you have found contentment with the external, you move into the internal. You don't just go into mystical practice, spirituality, because it will change your overall philosophy. One can say any sort of mystical or spiritual practice, the serious ones, not the artificial robotic ones, uh, are in some sense, how would I say it? Your concentration is going from looking at the external, and as you look at the external, you wonder how all of this is being internalized. When you wonder about your inner being, you begin to see your outer existence is identified by an objective phenomena, your body, you know? But your inner sense of self is like more like an attention where various thoughts pass through and various thoughts are kind of brushed into it and in some sense brushed out of it. Okay, so pretty much when we go looking within for ourselves, we in some sense eventually find ourselves beyond the language threshold. This is a concept I've developed, the language threshold. In some sense, what I mean by it is that you will eventually find a way of contentment and acknowledgement of your experience and your existence, which cannot be dualistic. So you will, in some sense, it's that moment when you have gone into a sort of contemplative atmosphere where experience and existence have become one moment. That means the subjective framework and the objective framework, they're kind of seen like the yin yang symbol. Your thoughts are in matter, matter is in your thoughts, you know. And what that means is that your imagination is based on reality, but your reality extends through your imagination. So in some sense, there's this constant dance of the known and the unknown. And there is something I will say, it's not all in the realm of the free will. That means what we find to be our individual free will eventually will dissolve into a collective movement. You know, physically you will return to the earth, and you know, non-physically you are the earth, you know. You are your moment. The moment has an incredible significance because it is constantly layered with various beliefs, various ideology, various shapes and symbols in some sense. We don't just dress ourselves in clothes, we dress the idea of ourselves in various beliefs, and in some sense, a journey, the stories of our life, the characters in our stories of our life are in some sense our archetypes. And this is, of course, my view. I'm not speaking per se with the accuracy of a Jungian scholar, Carl Jungian scholar, you know. But I'm speaking about in the sense that when I wondered who I am, I was externally just left with objective phenomena, kind of just as it is, but internally there came a constant movement. I've had many moments where I've sat still and I've wondered about what's moving. You know, there's this very profound Zen story that says these two imperial guards, guards of like the palace, you know, who had to stand every day in front of like palace guards, these imperial palace guards. One day, one of them gets, you know, a bit bored and looks at the other one and says, "Hey, man, you see that flag that's moving? It's the flag it's the wind that's moving it. The flag is not moving." And then the other imperial guard looks at, you know, it's funny. He looks at the flagpole and the flag, and he's like, "The wind that's moving, it's the flag." You know, one of them thinks it's the flag that's moving. The other thinks it's the wind that's moving. And so they have this profound debate, and to their surprise, coincidentally, they find that there is this Zen master walking by. The Zen master who never would come out of the mountain. Suddenly, he finds himself there. And so the guards run up to him and they're like, "Kind, wise sir." Oh my God, what is up with my internet? They say, "Kind, wise sir, please tell us this situation we're in. What's moving? Is it the flag or is it the wind? Which one's moving?" And in that moment, the Zen master looks at them and very profoundly says, it is the mind that's moving. And it's a very profound moment for them, because these people, these guards, eventually come to realize that there is a sort of inner movement of intelligence prior to the outer movement, kind of, in some sense, being firm. And I have personally experienced evidence of this, but it's a very unique sort of evidence. It's pretty much in a dream state. I could move consciously. Okay, I could go left in the dream, I could go right in the dream, I could run fast in the dream. There was a sort of freedom of there was a certain freedom for my free will in not all of my dreams, but in like two dreams, I've kind of moved consciously. And in those dreams, how would I say it to you? It's as if I woke up from that dream in utter shock, because I recognized my mind could simulate my free will even when the body is inactive. So I realized the depth of the intelligence, the power of the mind. It moves prior to even we being individuals that consider it moving. You see, it is the ignition of life prior to our conscious grasp. Consciousness is, in some unique way, you can say it has been ignited on the surface of our planet. And in some sense, as one conscious creature evolved, other conscious creatures began seeing that conscious creature. And so there was this interconnectivity of learning from each other's behaviors, and it became more complex as the tribal dynamic evolved, and as we eventually became creatures that were so civil that we could use language. You see, language was a sort of moving before we move. So the same relationship a person has with language, they will come to in the mystical practice, they will come to the same way words are, concepts are for you. They're kind of here but not here. Similarly, you will find your state of being to be similar, because you will notice you have been considering yourself as a thought, you know? And so it's very important, because there's two questions that arise. What can a thought do? Where can a thought go? And the second question is, how do we know we are a thought? These are very important questions to ask, because if you are a thought, you are defined by the design of that structure or concept. So sometimes when we go through various memories, they structure into, think of it this way, you're having ideas on your ideas. You're not your thoughts. That's why there's a multiplicity at work in regards to how one can consider many things at the same time, how one can consider the driving force of the various phenomena in space and the movement of time. Guys, by the way, it's 1:07 a.m. right now, and this person's driving too fast outside like the window. Yeah. So, first thing is, we have to find the cracks in our knowledge of our own memories, and we have to consider how the memory is being kept. And there was this study done that they found like this kind of family, like a bunch of different families, and they brought a relative from that family, and they told the relative to lie about an incident that happened to that relative. And that relative, in some sense, what actually no, the way the experiment was that the scientists, in some sense, went the experiment. Those conducting the experiment went to these family members and said, "Your cousin said she fell on her, like she fell and she scarred her knee, and she had to, like, something like that happened. Do you remember that time? She said you were there, or she remembered it, or something." And the person will eventually been given enough detail to believe that it is true, and the person's like, yeah, yeah, so many people were like, yeah, I remember that happening, I remember that happening, but the thing never happened. And what that means is that when the mind is overfilled with detail, it will make conclusions. When data is solid to you, you will create solid relationships between things, you know and that is not the full full context of the situation. You know, we have to be careful not about just others fooling us. We have to be careful about us fooling ourselves. And sometimes when you listen to somebody fooling you, you find in that you find yourself in that situation. So what is the attitude? The attitude I find that is required to truly get a comprehension of the mind on this existence is to kind of find out how the story of your life has come to be you. Eventually, you will either wonder about the future or you will go wonder about the past. Believe it or not, you can attain a state of clarity through both because um, you're not thought. Okay, whenever thought amplifies, it becomes something that, in some sense, becomes cataclysmic, becomes a sort of like you suddenly notice a pattern in your intelligence that you had never noticed before, and then that pattern becomes the dominant pattern. And so in mystical self-inquiry, people are, in some sense, think of it this way: the spiritual person is looking for concepts that will change their context of being. Okay, many people are looking for experiences so they can be somebody else. And sometimes the greatest spiritual practice is first seeing what is here. That means meditation, the kind of mystical kind, people should not just jump to that. Prior to, I say this in many of, not many, but in some of my talks I say it like this, where I say you got to study language and you got to study how language is defining your world before you actually dive into metaphysics. Because if you get an experience that you cannot put into language, it's going to shake your previous reality. At the same time, you don't know how to assimilate the new reality. Sometimes a person, like imagine a child suddenly pushed really hard for no reason. That child is in some sense a state where it will not understand why something happened to it, even though it did, and yet it would have to somehow incorporate the experience. And so most people, when they go into chaotic, extreme experiences in life, you know, sometimes especially, um, how would I say it, like there's some extreme people in this world and they take things too far and they disturb other people's realities. And what happens is, I oftentimes, when someone becomes the victim of chaos, they wonder if they could have done something, and then they blame themselves. Okay, so the child who can't push back the outer world will push his own internal reality. You know, there's this kind of strange, that I don't know why, but there's this kind of attitude of sacrifice in cultures all around the world, where when we see something that has more value than ourselves, we give our lives for it. Not everybody does this, of course, but I'm saying, like for example, I remember this movie called Stranger Things by Will Ferrell or something, and in the movie, Will Ferrell sacrifices himself to save a kid who's about to be hit from the bus, with the bus or something, you know, and there's a sort of exchange of value. You know, when someone feels their life doesn't have meaning, they seek out meaning, and eventually they find the meaning in other people's lives and they contribute to it. When I looked at, for example, many of these kind of enlightened people around the world, and stretching from ancients to modern, I noticed that the people that gravitate around these kind of like enlightened kind of figures, there are people who, it's kind of like a moth and candle situation. That means the moth comes close to the candle, yet it cannot go into the, it cannot, you cannot have the same eyes as you know what you're following. Okay, in 1 a.m. there people are racing, you know. I remember especially in 2014 when I would give these talks, I would give them in a public space. And when I say a public space, I mean it was just the yard of this accommodation area where I was in the UK. And I would go into moments when it wasn't busy, when there was nobody around, and I would just sit there and I would sit on the grass and just be there for a little bit without any preference. And eventually, my preferences would, in some sense, somehow strangely, like my mind would settle and my true interests would come forth. Sometimes, like a lot of people are trying to improve themselves, yet they never wonder if they are already improved beings. They're already improved beings, and yet they don't have access to it. This is why I say you're an advanced communicator. You're an advanced communication of your universal sector. You have cosmic awareness because you are a creature aware of the cosmos. Okay, and we are natural, as far as we know. You know, and it's strange because suffering is kind of like nature's mistake in the eyes of man. We're like, why do we suffer? Why is there death? Why is there old age? Why is there sickness? Why is there all these inevitable kind of things that visit people? And the Buddha wondered about this. The Buddha wondered about the meaning of life, you know. And he eventually followed many methods, and eventually he just sat by a tree. He kind of gave up the illusion, the journey in the illusion. He gave up what was not fulfilling his being. Okay, he gave it up. He searched for truth, couldn't find it. He sat by a tree and stood still, and suddenly noticed. He suddenly noticed the sort of peace that was hiding in the stillness and silence of reality. How prior to any words or language or sounds being heard, it's as if there is a silence there before. Prior to you moving or doing anything, there was a stillness there before, you know? And so, stillness and silence are the parents of movement and noise. What that means is, as you really kind of go through this reverse engineered kind of route of contemplating your own reality, how would I say it? You come to you pass what you've been avoiding, you pass your fears, you kind of go to your earliest memory, and it's like as you reverse engineer through this kind of story of life. And of course, guys, this is a unique episode compared to others because I am sharing more of I guess my personal kind of experience of what occurs when one wonders about their origin, or the origin of the moment in some sense. Physically, it's evolutionary, but internally, there seems to, in some sense, be this awareness, this attributeless awareness in the stillness and silence prior to movement. When one reaches that attributelessness, kind of the presence of the moment beyond the personality, what really this is the unique thing. It's as if like many human beings on this planet have reached this state where they're, how can I tell you it, in a sort of mystical kind of book, they said it's when the person becomes one with their truth. That means you're looking for your truth outside of you. You're looking for your greatness, for your efficiency, for all the things you want outside of you. Yet you have to realize you have to fix the container. And what that means is your mind is constantly containing objective phenomena in subjective ways. And oftentimes these subjective ways are given to it. as the cycles of subjectivity stop prior to the objectivity stopping, as you really kind of become aware of your presence prior to your personality, and you access memories where subjective conception was not present. I mean, physically, we have this idea that our memories are like from the beginning of the day we were born till now. We don't. The mainstream Western society and academia teaches Buddhism and teaches about incarnation and reincarnation and all this, but it does not acknowledge it. We acknowledge that our brains began recording things as they were created, and it's kind of like the data we have access to is just the data, the conscious data of this lifetime. But here's the unique thing. I find that eventually, as we go deeper into our contemplation of our intelligence, eventually we will reach a non-dual state. When we reach a non-dual state, it's very unique. It's as if your thoughts find heaven before you do. So you begin to have these very blissful moments where I uniquely say it's a moment where you cry and laugh at the same time. That means I've had moments where, especially when I went to India for a couple of months in Rishikesh, India, and I would have moments where after doing yoga the whole day, where I was staying in an ashram, like physical yoga, hatha yoga, I would eventually, at the end of the night, kind of like a tired version of myself, would go into this shrine room they had, and I would just sit there. And I would sit there, and my mind would look at the shrine. And my mind would look at the shrine and wonder about how many people came to this shrine, looked at it, prayed on it, prayed and stuff. And it was very unique because, guys, my background's not Indian. I'm actually Persian, but born in Iran, raised in Canada. And when I went to India, I sat down. I remember I went to the Divine Life Society, and they had this sort of meditation hall. I remember I was just sitting there, doing nothing, kind of like this stranger in a strange place, just being not engaging anything, just sitting. And as I was sitting there, I saw these people come in front of me, uh, and they walked towards the shrine, and they touched the shrine, and they did some sort of ceremonial bow to the shrine, and they left. They left the shrine. They came and said, as if like they came and gave, gave their prayers to the shrine and left. And I remember as they were leaving, they were staring at me because, of course, physically I looked different, like, but also it was kind of like very unique because the way I was dressed was like jeans and a t-shirt. But anyways, like, anyways, when I was there, the point I'm trying to get to is that I was sitting there. And these people came in, they did their ceremony, they saw me, they looked at me, it's like, okay, what's this kid doing here? And then they left. And for me, I was there and I noticed that their attention came, it's as if they didn't understand why they were there. Do you see most people, unfortunately, certain religious cultures, it's more of a behavioral faith. Most people don't even wonder, they don't even contemplate, they don't even try to see how their experience relates to the sort of existence they're accepting. And it was a kind of course that person, I mean, I don't know how those people were seeing, but to me it came across that they were worshiping. It's like there's this saying, this actually Native American Cherokee saying that says, when I point at the stars, don't look at my finger. And when they had come into that shrine, it felt as if they were looking at the tip of the finger. They were not looking at what was being pointed to. That means many religious communities do not have a comprehension of kind of the transcendental state of mind that is kind of suggestive, like many of these enlightened people. That means when you go ask the guru, like if many people went up to the enlightened guru and they asked, they're like, my guru, what's going to happen to you after you die? Kind of very, like, bold disciple. It's like, what's going to happen when you die, bro? And the guru would look at him and would say that I will always be here. And the guy looked at the student and he said, I would always be here. And the student got shocked. Because when the body is gone, what is here? What is left here? Even the word, we use the word soul, but what is that? What is here? And the way you can comprehend this is that what is here was prior to you being here. So if there is a pattern of your intelligence prior to this whole conscious biological framework occurring, it's as if like there were batteries in the remote before you even picked up the remote for the first time. There was a sort of intelligence packed behind your eyes, you know, packaged behind your eyes, you know, packaged intelligence, you know. So eventually one has to confront emptiness, the emptiness of life, and the fullness of life, because many start off as an ideological, physical kind of like they acknowledge themselves as just those dimensions. Life will only be fulfilling if there's more stuff in it. As if we see an empty room and we're like, okay, we're here in this empty room, and because we're here, we have to do something. There has to be purpose, and because we're here, we there's many ways that, like how would I say it? It's as if the world does not only contain us, we contain the world. And when we contain the world, our mind acts as if it is the god of matter. But when the world controls us, the free will is pushed back into the subconscious and the person feels enslaved by their sensory perception. There's a book I remember I got from a while ago. It's called The Psychology of Mystical Awakening by Swami Savitra Priya. Hopefully I didn't butcher the name, but I'm gonna open a random page and read it for you. It's page 84, chapter 3 of this book called Psychology of Mystical Awakening. The page says, meditation, the seventh step, is defined as an advanced stage of concentration when there has become less struggle to keep your attention focused solely on the single object. Meditation is attained when extraneous thoughts cease and only the one wave image of your object flows across the lake of the mind. Yeah, yeah. Your attention pretty much, your free will begins identifying as the attention, so it can choose to concentrate on one form echoing in all your memories. So what that means is that child who's been winning in every situation, suddenly when he loses, suddenly all his victories feel like there was something missing there. You see? And it's the opposite, like somebody who's been losing a lot in life, suddenly when they win, it's as if that memory is off the pattern of the rest of the other memories in some sense. And fundamentally, the experience you have kind of reshapes all the accumulated imagery of your sensory perception. So believe it or not, it's not that we have memories, it's that like there is residue of past moments that we've walked in our awareness. However, how the consciousness chooses to take shape based on the most current experience becomes kind of like a sort of pattern overall influencing the way you see things. So we say that if we wanted to find truth, we would realize, okay, if I wanted to find truth, it's something that eventually, if I find it, it would be an experience of now. So one begins to see, even if you found truth, it would be here and you would be experiencing it. Okay. Now there are, of course, religious considerations that truth is beyond this world. But that truth that is beyond this world, there's two ways you can see the beyond. There is an external beyond, That means beyond our skies, beyond our solar system, beyond our galaxy, even multidimensionally beyond. But then there is the inner kind of beyond. And this is very unique because the body entertains a sort of infinite model of multidimensionality, but the mind simply considers the death of time to be eternity. So your mind will reach a moment where before it looks at the watch, it is present. That presence is powerful, you know? You have to learn from not just how you're being a person, but how this person is present. Because then you will have a way of kind of seeing the self and the world and how they're codependent concepts. Yourself is the concept, the world is the context, okay? Now, when the world becomes the concept, yourself becomes the context. When yourself becomes the context, you see this ever present self in everything. You know, you see God everywhere, pretty much like ancient Indian tradition. So you can see that the Western, the European Enlightenment saw itself as the concept and the world as the context. But in ancient Eastern Enlightenment, they saw, in some sense, their self as the context, and the world as the concept. And of course, the concept is found in the context, you know? So it's very important. It's very important, this consideration, because they are models of thought. That means on some level, when I look at all human beings, even including myself, even though there is free will and there's these, beautiful visions of this ever presence beyond language and duality, even though I say that right now, currently, my intelligence is working with programs, but programs I'm aware of. And it took a while to realize these, but even though I say it took a while, the realization was an instant. You know, it's like when somebody forgets something, even though it takes a long time for you to suddenly remember it, but when you remember it, it's instant. You're like, oh my God, I forgot my keys. You know, that's an instant of revelatory subjective momentum. Okay, it's like it's instantaneous. You eventually have to come to studying your mind in its instantaneous value creation moment. Sometimes your mind, it takes time to create value for itself. What does that mean? That means you set out a goal, and unless you have it, until you have achieved that goal, it's as if you feel you don't have value. You know, if all those people who suddenly make their ambition to be rich, they will live lives where until they get rich, they won't feel they have a value. So even though it inspires a sense of hard work, but it's also a kind there's always a simpler way to complexity. I find that eventually, as one begins studying their memory, their mind will begin moving in unknown. The mind will have unknown movements. These unknown movements, the mind still, your subconscious will try to give you a face. That means when the conscious mind, let's say the conscious part of your intelligence, wonders about the unconscious, the subconscious acts as the intermediary. You know, that means one can say your imagination is a sort of intermediary between the fullness of life and the emptiness of life. You can imagine how life can be infinite. Like imagine right now, like you're like there's infinite parallel realities of you, and in each of those parallel realities, you are flying. Imagine in a different part of the sky, you know. But as the mind externally, but due to its objective reference, brings about that infinitude, internally it goes to a sort of non-dual eternity, which means ever presence. So when I say within, I'm not trying to take you to some place. What is within you is non-local again. Your consciousness is non-local, yet it is what is holding the locality. So it's like this kind of, I say non-local, but at the same time I could say multi-local, because what it means is that we oscillate between, like, you don't see life in just one dimension. In that one dimension you see many dimensions. The fact that I could look at a tree and subjectively consider it's made of atoms, that's as if like there's one normal dimension of the tree, and then there's the more complex vision of what is within the tree. which is a multiplicity of various particles working through a sort of field of intelligence. For me, this was a big deal because I was thinking that my intelligence only comes from my brain. I had kind of ignored the presence of the world in my being. I was so caught up in thinking that I'm a certain person from a certain place with a certain story, and eventually I came to realize, no, I'm the eyes of the universe that are open right now, and I choose to clothe the self in names and ideology, but it cannot. So when we talk about a structure, when I use the word structure, you can say again there's two types of structure. There's dynamic structures and static structures. You can look at your life as if it's a kind of unfolding story, or you can look at your life as if it's a snapshot photo, and you usually, if you do it like that, you get stressed and depressed. That means whenever a person is stressed and depressed, it's good to ask yourself, this sense of self that is experiencing pain, suffering, and all this, how long has that sense of self been there? Okay, because there's an awareness that you have, which is from the beginning of your life. Pretty much every waking moment you've had is like somehow by your intelligence being witnessed, so you feel like you're the same person, but every year you're blowing candles, and in some sense, as you have your birthday, your body is physically changing. They say, what is it, like they say the cells of the body change in 2 weeks, the cells of the brain change in years, or something like that. So it's one of those things where change becomes the wave that the surfer of consciousness, the conscious surfer, needs to ride. And you are riding this unconscious, unknown movement of material phenomena and particles in empty space through what is your surfboard? It is this ego. The ego is your surfboard. It is the conscious component that has found a way to reorganize or realign or recategorize the unconscious. That's pretty much everyday struggle. Is not just physically the person's hustling in their work environment and whatnot. You're constantly reanimating the values of the world based on your newest experiences. Once you understand that, you either find freedom through novelty, or you find freedom through an inevitable emptiness, which again leads you towards novelty. That means when there's nothing to lose, you will go for it. But as long as you feel there's something to lose, a lot of your intelligence will not be accessible to you because you have not allowed it, because there's something to lose. Like that person who's afraid of losing his money, he will stop actually making money because his attention is on preservation rather than creation. And yeah, something of that sort. So memory structures can be dynamic and can be static, and oftentimes meditation is a static, is a memory. It's like the present moment becoming a static memory, yet it is still present. So imagine right now you are going up a staircase of a building, you know and as you're going up the staircase of the building, you're not stopping one by one. You get to the first floor, you get to the second floor, you get to the third floor. Each step is a new step. But now, let's say as you're going up these steps, the mind is creating a sort of chronological memory thing. Okay, you were like, okay, I was on the first floor, now I'm on the second floor, now I'm on the third floor. So it's as if, like, when you have gone to the second floor, the memory of the first floor is there. That means the experience of the first floor you were walking on the stairs of has now become the memory as you are on the second floor. Now, if you don't change the environment, the mind will find itself in a way not being able to categorize itself because it is in one moment. So this constant, I kind of feel like our memories orbit around us, or in some sense, we are like the infinity symbol. We're the center of the infinity symbol. Constantly, thoughts are in a loop kind of way, in a twisted circle kind of way. Like if you take an elastic band and you twisted it, you know, in a kind of curved manner, our experience is looping. And I don't know how far, I haven't studied that much of Albert Einstein's writings to see that when he was writing about space-time in some sense, coming to those conclusions, if he ever wondered that human beings are found in a loop of nature. I mean, of course, there is this notion of kind of, what is it, like a, what would it be, like a circular wormhole or something? But like, it's that I'm pretty much saying this idea of change, recognizing it's like your mind is constantly changing at a certain pace. When you suddenly are stuck in an environment, your mind cannot change as quick. Okay? So what occurs is that internally environments begin generating, as if like that person who went through all those 4 floors, suddenly when he stops, as if the mind is expecting to go on to a higher floor, but there's no other floor. You see, it's as if a certain pattern begins to kind of vibrate, and eventually, when you reach the end of that pattern, or that pattern is no longer consciously energized with your attention, your mind will suddenly. Think of it this way: if you run suddenly and stop still, let's say you're in a moment where you're just watching, okay? Let's say you watch, you see a, I don't know, let's say back in the day you see a herd of buffalo and you run with them. You know? So the moment you stop, the herd is still moving in your mind. And that's my suggestion, that we have to become very sensitive. Oftentimes, the study of the mind takes the person towards a sort of existential sensitivity. That existential sensitivity, if the person has not found their true nature, will be a hassle. It's as if somebody gave you homework about something you have no idea of. It will feel like that, so you will either reject further exploration into the depth of your mind, or you will just define it. You will again clothe it in a belief. There's this very unique kind of Zen story that kind of will prove my point. This Zen story is a story is a story that, in some sense, there was this kind of you know, meditation, this meditation practitioner, you know, this meditator, in some sense, just sitting, and he just sits there, and this guy suddenly gets a realization. Sometimes you who need to walk towards realizations, and usually those occur through your mistakes. You learn from your mistakes. Failure becomes feedback, or sometimes the solutions to your problem walk to you. You know, and that's the power of a change in mind, a change in the space of how you keep yourself. You know. This pretty much, this meditator gets this profound revelation. He realizes something about the truth of nature, how nature is working, how functioning, how the laws of the mind and all this are occurring. He suddenly gets the sight, gets the true vision of the inner sight. And when that occurs, it's not that the guy's like completely seen it, but he's realized something that he hadn't realized before. So he's kind of become a bit more enlightened than before. He's aware of the light in his eyes in a much more deeper and more not conceptual but more clearer way. So what happens is, as the Zen story goes, there's this minion. There's like this sort of entity in some other dimension. This minion, as the story said it, that looks at this and is like, holy shit, this guy just realized something about the truth of the world. He realized something about the truth of nature. And this minion runs to the Dark Lord. It runs to the Dark Lord and says, Dark Lord. Dark Lord's like, what? And the minion says, Dark Lord, this man has just realized something about the truth. He's getting closer to knowing about the reality. The Dark Lord says, don't worry about it. He will make a belief out of it. and the minion just doesn't. That's the end of the story. And that's the point, that sometimes when we find treasure, we want to show it to everyone, we want to do something with it. We turn our experiences into fixed subjective values, which reduce from the dynamism of the experiences. If the person rode a horse, but then he got off the horse and people were like, yo man, what's that state like? And the guy's like, it's kind of like even though he's in a static state, he's not on the horse anymore, but the memories of that riding the horse kind of echo within him. Okay, and so what I'm trying to tell you is that we are under the impression that our truths require to be static, objective, evidence-based things, but they could potentially be dynamic rhythms and flows of intelligence that they will open up as we like find ourselves in that rhythmic pattern. That's kind of what I'm trying to say. I'm noticing something unique. Our species has dwelled too long in just objective and objects and subjects. Now these subjects and objects are moving. There's a sort of motion. Who said that we can have fixed beliefs in a changing universe? This is why a belief proves nothing. If somebody comes and says, I believe there's like a blue elephant behind you, even though I can't see it, but I believe, you know, you'd be like, hey man, you're the only elephant here, you're the only elephant in the room. And so what I mean by that is that belief sometimes doesn't require experience. Sometimes based on your subjective kind of potential, you create your beliefs. Okay, this is why when I talk about these things, how can I say it? I kind of noticed it. I tried holding a concept forever. It's just like we are not immortal beings by nature. Similarly, our thoughts are not immortal as well. That means even though you have a problem, you can either solve it or you don't. If you don't solve it, eventually, throughout time, the world will change. When the world changes, that means the problem got bored before you found a solution and the situation changed. You know? And sometimes you find a solution and you liberate the problem. I'm going to read a page, and a number kind of popped into my mind from this Psychology of Mystical Awakening. It's page 72 of chapter 2. It says, when you plant the seed of self-sufficiency within yourself and become disinterested in amassing possessions or accepting gifts that have strings attached, which is the opposite of being dependent and selfishly collecting and hoarding objects and... Okay, Jesus. When you plant the seed of self-sufficiency within yourself and become disinterested in amassing possessions or accepting gifts that have strings attached, which is the opposite of being dependent and selfishly collecting and hoarding objects, and cultivate these by practicing feeling them sprout and grow within you so that you actually become the embodiment of self-sufficiency and disinterest in amassing possessions. Intellectually, emotionally, and within every cell of your body, you will gain a perfect understanding of the how and why of this birth, which will answer all of your questions about your life. So pretty much when you have a conscious effort or a conscious attention to some form, eventually your attention will grow upon that form. As it grows upon that form, it matures into a sort of self-efficiency. This self-efficiency is kind of like you looking at your life and suddenly noticing all the parts of it where you're not being true. You're not being true to yourself. You're not doing what your intelligence in some sense moving towards. You're doing what the world wants. And of course you have to, unfortunately, the way system is designed until we liberate society. Society is not liberated. That means we are slaves to our survival. We're not masters of our survival yet, unless we are like everybody's filthy rich, But we are, in some sense, we have to conduct ourselves in this life. We have to work. And so human beings are known for two qualities. One is that there are creatures that work, and the second thing is there are creatures that continue. We are pretty much the continuous work of nature, pretty much. Okay? And when we no longer resist work, then that's when, this is a concept I say, your great work begins. When you are no longer fighting this world, when you're no longer resisting how it's happening, you can just stand there, watch it, and just see it. And it's very interesting because when I was younger, I would, this was a kind of unique thing about my intelligence. Waves of data would hit me, and I would react. It's as if I knew nothing else. It was like I was in an animal. When you pushed me, I'd like kind of like react. I wouldn't process the data. It's like many children. They're so playful and just running around, but many of them do not realize the value of their free will. And unfortunately, society doesn't teach it. Society wants to take your free will away from you. You know why? Because when you don't have free will, you complain less. So eventually the mysteries of hidden memory structures will come down to a sort of contentment with how your experience is leading to your existence and how existence is leading to your experience. If you see existence here first, you will feel your experience is only objective. If you somehow come to, you transcend your conceptual domains of space and time, and change just becomes change. You see, what we're considering time is the movement of particles in space as they change. So if things never change, we would never know if anything's going on or time's moving forward. It is the fact that things change and there's a temporalness to life that has made the concept of time even be alive. Plato went as far as to even say time is the moving image of eternity. That means eternal change is the direction. Like time is like, it's like we're constantly going forward in eternal change, and that's how time is there. You know, in some sense, time is the arrow of eternal change. The forward arrow that's extracted out of eternal change. So what I'm trying to tell you is, when change just becomes change, not the way you want things to change, or the way the world, others want the things to change, it pretty much moves beyond belief systems. So you no longer become deceived, you know. Pretty much, let me tell you, it's very boring to just get. I find many teachers, like I could totally see it in many of the teachers in my education, like as I attended school and university. It was like, I could totally see, like, the teachers, they were doing it more as a job than actually seeing it's a performance. I remember we had this one teacher, she was so shy. The teacher was more shy than the students. And I was an incredibly shy person too, at that time. But I was like, damn, this teacher's more shy than me. But the teacher eventually knew enough to speak. But the thing was, she didn't know herself to speak as herself. Okay, and so the inspiration of the teacher is not to just get a student or disciple to be like the teacher. That's a deception. That's stealing. Okay, when you make somebody like yourself, that's stealing. But when you activate the authentic curiosity of the individual to wonder about their own life, because you're in it once. You have entered this life to be you, not anybody else. You have not entered this life to just follow the ways that others have kind of lived, because then it would be boring. The moment you try to copy somebody, the moment you try to be like your idols, like a lot of children have music idols and many things, of course. There are exceptions to this. Sometimes the idols are inspirations for the person's own ingenuity, but in some sense, it is one of those situations where you understand the value of your eyes in a changing world, and you understand the spirit of novelty that permeates everything. Everything can be seen anew. The story of your life you're telling yourself can be seen anew. It can be done in an instant. However, you have to wonder about how your mind is being your moment, and how your senses are being your moment, and how all of it is simply here. That's the fascinating part. That's the fascination about it. It's all here. So when we say a mystery, the reason I say mysteries of hidden memory structures is because eventually it will go towards the unknown, because knowledge cannot contain it. Knowledge becomes that room where you can't fit in any more experiences once you filled it up. You know, we must not be afraid of change. It is actually our superpower that we change. uh, all those people who are stressed and depressed. Even I have been in moments. I remember I was in in a town. I believe it was what was the place called? It was, anyways. I think it was Chislago. Yeah, Chislago was the town, and I was in Italy, and I was staying in a hotel, and I remember it was at night, and I went to the, and of course, like, unfortunately, I smoke cigarettes, and I went outside the window, and uh, I was kind of dwelling in my mistakes. It wasn't a fun time. I remember I was outside. When I say outside the window, like, they didn't have a balcony to the hotel room, but they had enough of a ledge where one person could sit. And just like, imagine like a feet away from my feet, there was like the edge of the building. I was just there, kind of quietly, smoking in a forbidden way. It wasn't allowed. So as I was there, I remember I went into this kind of, my mind began, like, I've had days where my mind has been very gracious to me, and I've had days where my mind's been chaotic. Okay, and this was one of those chaotic nights. Some people say dark night of the soul, but I believe the soul doesn't the soul doesn't have dark nights. Unless you're Batman. I'm joking. But um, it was a very, pretty much, my mind went into this kind of loop of bashing the idea of myself. So I started, it's as if in one moment of my life I saw kind of failure and valuelessness, and that sense of value, non-value in my life, was like this value, worthless sense of feeling was echoing in all my memories. I felt like my whole lifetime was worthless. I felt my life had no meaning. And I remember, because I honestly, in that moment, I was tearing up. I was tearing up because it was a sort of emotional dissonance. It was a sort of disharmony of how the mind and the body were, right? And how the mind and the world were. Because your body is pretty much, it comes across, your mind is an extension of the world, you know? So pretty much, I go through this thing, and I remember I become sad. My mind is being like, sometimes I think through language, sometimes I think through imagery, and it was a moment where there was, uh, as language moves in your mind through higher speeds, because you have images of your personhood, it translates into this unknown sense of dialogue. So many people who feel they're having, like, thinking is having this inner dialogue. Like, an example of it would be, you see in movies, like that guy who's trying to cross the bridge, and he closes his eyes. He's afraid of heights, and he's like, "Don't look down, don't look down." He's talking to himself. He's trying to encourage himself to get through it, and he says, "Don't look down, don't look down." And he suddenly looks down and he freaks out. So it was one of those situations where my thoughts of self-loathing and, in some sense, self-disturbance were moving at such a speed that it felt like a sort of dialogue which felt like me. And I remember I was there, kind of feeling terrible and feeling very tragic and feeling like, all I had done was nothing, and not even a metaphysical, philosophical way. I just felt like bad about myself. And I remember I looked at the edge and I thought, holy shit, what if I turn off this whole system? And unfortunately, dangerous thoughts enter my mind. Thoughts of using a bridge the wrong way. And I remember I was in that moment, and suddenly, like, something so hilarious happened. I suddenly got bored of this loop of stress, depression, and weakness. I got bored of my mind constantly putting this images of my weakness. I got bored of my mind. I got bored of my stress and depression in that instant. I got bored of it. It was like, I'm like, okay, what is this? Like, how long am I gonna sit here and my mind's gonna be like, oh, I couldn't do that moment. I didn't do that in that moment. Oh my God, I failed there. Oh my God, I felt there. It was like my mind got boring to myself, you know. And this is why it's very important to recognize you're not a creature of thought. Because if you think you're a creature of thought, thoughts will lead your actions, will define your actions. And of course, in current society, there's some people think the ego is just a bad thing. I don't think the ego is a bad thing. The ego is a tool. Pretty much external reality is like a technology for me. It's like a kind of vehicle I'm navigating in. Manifestation, existential manifestation is a vehicle for my attention. Okay, when I wake up in the morning, there's like this kind of presence of attention, and then there's what comes into this attention. Pretty much you're like a film camera. Okay? You're a film camera that at the same time sees its own movie. And the world, many things pass in front of it, pretty much. So my attention returned in that moment of kind of suffering and self-loathing. In the dark night of the soul, suddenly it dawned on me how boring it was to constantly think of myself in weak and incapable ways. Like pretty much the question came, okay, for how many years? For how many years do I constantly want to look at myself and have these unnecessary emotions around it? Right, so when something becomes unnecessary, like that's a level prior to freedom. Okay, so when it becomes unnecessary for you to be enslaved, roars of freedom occur, in your mind, which means that freedom actually begins internally and eventually appears externally. You have to be free internally. Your mind has to have freedom. And I know this because, unfortunately, I kind of understood this. No, I don't want to say unfortunately, but like, I was raised in Iran, and Iran is a sort of theocratic government. It's a theocracy. Pretty much religion is in the laws of society and governance. And I remember that there was a sort of restriction, and I kind of grew up with certain restrictions that when I entered Western culture, I noticed that the people there didn't have. Okay, and it's kind of like the same sort of disparity one finds when like pretty much I don't know how to say it, but like I noticed my mind was not free. Subconsciously, it had gotten used to a world that was not free, to a society, community that wasn't free. And so that freedom became really important because, similar to freedom, how I'm saying you need to internally find it and then externally you'll be relieved. Wars, when we think of war, the opposite of peace, the opposite of freedom, the freedom that can arise from peace, the serenity, the opposite of the serenity is havoc and war. And war starts from the minds of men. Do you see? No war has started. War starts because the people have different viewpoints, and in some sense, their communication cannot find harmony. I've had this. I've experienced this. I remember I had a very close friend. I actually this was a friend who needed a place to stay, and he was in a bad neighborhood, and I kind of helped and got him out of that neighborhood, you know. And eventually, I was very close with this friend, but through one discussion, through one argument, suddenly it was as if there was no longer harmony in our communication. Our worlds had differed to such a degree that, in some sense, there was no. Whenever respect goes out the window, no any sort of relationship is destroyed. So I remember somebody saying, actually, a very profound politician saying this. This politician said that, you don't need mutual trust, but you do need mutual respect at the beginning. That means whenever in any sort of negotiation, in any moment where you're communicating with another, you need to have mutual respect or there's no communication platform. You don't need to have mutual trust. You don't need to like trust everything, blindly. But have the respect, have an ability that it's like it's the same respect that the warriors back in the day had when suddenly like two great warriors were fighting, and one of them hit the sword off the hand of that warrior, and it was like one of those fight and a death kind of, we see it in movies kind of situation. And the warrior in that sense is so skilled, he's so able that he throws back the sword of his opponent and he begins fighting because he doesn't want the experience to end without his full capability kind of sprouting in the moment. So these are interesting things to keep in mind. Before I end up, I'm going to read one more page from this book, Psychology of Mystical Awakening. And believe it or not, I haven't read the whole book. Sometimes I kind of intuitively open books and kind of see what the book communicates first, like what words I see from the book first. So this is from chapter 3, 106. It's a big passage, but I'll read it. After you have become aware of the difference between the mind and consciousness, in addition to spontaneously and instantly knowing everything you need to know, the power of divine seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, and feeling will also be born with you. And I want to give a quick commentary on this, but here I'll say it. When fixed beliefs leave, your dynamic intelligence opens up. Pretty much when you don't think no longer something has to be in only one way, it frees your mind to conceiving in many other ways. So your hearing, smelling, tasting, your senses, as they're no longer kind of choked out and defined by your subjective experience, they become pure. Anyways, so I'm going to read it quickly from the beginning. After you have become aware of the difference between the mind and consciousness, in addition to spontaneously and instantly knowing everything you need to know, the power of divine seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, and feeling will also be born within you. But beware. Do not develop an inflated ego because you have been given access to these divine powers, because if you do, it will create obstacles which will eclipse the inner light of consciousness and prevent you from reaching the 7th chakra and attaining the highest degree of divine bliss and happiness. That only comes through the experience of the 5th samadhi. But if you have left behind all ego desires to exhibit these powers, you may project your consciousness outwards and enter into the solid physical body of others. Holy shit. But if you have left behind all ego desires to exhibit these powers, you may project your consciousness outwards and enter into the solid physical bodies of others, perceive the causes of suffering that are stored in their mind, and help them to attain a permanent state of happiness and peace while they're still in a body here on earth. Okay. So I got to really explain this, because there is truth to it, but the way she said it, it doesn't seem very true. Okay, so how would I say this? As one finds their presence beyond just the subjective and objective aspects of their personhood, of their personality, they will come into a moment where their true, you suddenly, how would I say it? It's like your presence becomes more illuminated than your personality. Okay, that means your mind has found contentment with the universe. Okay, so when that occurs, you enter a non-dual state where your senses no longer belong to the idea of you, so they are much more extensive in color. So right now you feel the idea of you owns your senses, but the sensory phenomena is just a certain thing that's happening. Once this sort of ownership of matter as a thought, as an unknown thought, kind of that the individual kind of evolves beyond that paradigm, eventually it will come into a moment where the person experiences a sort of samadhi. Samadhi is how you have noticed your conscious how you are, as you become conscious of existence, there arises a bliss because you find a sort of piece of things already being in position prior to you having to impose it. Okay? So if you do impose, if somebody, this is, they said this, it's not just this, what was her name, Swami Savitra Priya, who, in this book, who she's saying this, what she is saying, many ancient traditions have also said. Because as the person becomes more self-aware, the self is becoming more awareness. The awareness is non-conceptual, non-dual. The self is somewhat like as individual as you want it to be. So this awareness, it's like you suddenly getting the power of an ocean, okay? And how would I say it? In some sense, think of it this way. Before the person is aware, it's like they're moving against the river. Life is karmic to them. When they become aware, it's as if you suddenly change directions in the river and you go begin moving at a very fast speed. Okay? Now, this momentum that arises in your true nature due to non-dual experience of existence, so pretty much experience and existence are inseparable in that moment. Your subjects and your thoughts and all these are inseparable from the one aware of them, the witness within. And what occurs is that it's like the current, the momentum of the it's like the person who now is going with the river rather than being against it. That intensity should not be contained. It's as if you're reaching an energetic presence of your experience where there's no need to just contain it in a thought. So when you get an experience where you're no longer a thought, you don't have to put things in thoughts. Yet you become this kind of ever-present user of them. You find a comfort with data where the data no longer disturbs you. You know, as if there's an external layer of data, and then there's an internal layer of data, which is the subjectivity, and then there is the data processor, which is purely the processing power. That means the way, even though we say the data and the processor cannot be inseparable for the data processor, but this is the raw processor state. This is the raw state of your intelligence where you're watching it be processed. That means it's like before you believe in something, you're watching your beliefs come into form. You're watching thoughts come and go. You're watching objective particles and phenomena moving. So it should not eventually be contained because the ego is, I don't want to say it's an inferior technology, but it is... ideas are so powerful that they can be you, okay? And once an incredible energy is trying to be kept subjectively, it it just doesn't work. It's like putting a cup on a valve, on a tap, like filling a cup with tap water, but the water doesn't stop. Eventually, there will be a surplus. Eventually, there will be a sort of disharmony. It's like reality won't just be adequately contained, it will be inadequately contained. That means you're experiencing this sort of profound presence, yet this presence is trying to fit in, it's trying to possess an idea of itself. Okay, so there are moments where, in some sense, the world will look at you and say, "Hey, calm it down. Be calm. Just be mindful for a second. Watch yourself." But there are moments where you will have to. Your free will has to get involved. Okay, and there's some moments where the free will can be just present, because anything done out of your freedom to you will feel like an effort of enslavement externally of you. Okay, that means when somebody places, something. Let's say you put a vase filled with flowers on the table, and you come back and you see somebody in your family kind of move this somewhere else. Okay, you come home, you see something that is different, so you feel your free will is, I don't want to say it's betrayed, but in some sense it is, something has changed before your attention was on it to change it. And then that creates a sort of, it can lead to a subjective kind of forest fire, or or a sort of just you objectively become content. And so eventually in this it says, this sort of ego that shouldn't come into form in higher states. In the ancient yogis in Vedanta, they understood, because pretty much samadhi and enlightenment, and even the word yoga means union. Most people in the West don't realize it. For them, yoga goes as far as yoga pants do. You know, the price of yoga pants. But yoga is, in actuality, the word means union, and it is the union of the individual activity with the cosmic activity. Now, science is kind of telling us, okay, when you look at the cosmos, don't see a creator, don't see an intelligence, just see stuff. Okay? But when we look at ourselves, we're not just stuff. We are that which is moving stuff, or the movement of stuff. Okay? We're not. Do you see what I'm saying? So in some sense, I'm kind of suggesting that you can choose to see the cosmos as a room, and it will eventually come down to your preference. You can choose to be an individual. You can feel like you're an individual, or you can. It's where you feel like you're the whole world. You know, not just on top of the world. You have become the world. You know, you are the movement of the world. You know, you can get to these states. However, meditation, as Swami Krishnananda would say, Swami Krishnananda is. Wait a minute. Why did the stream stop? Oh, okay. Okay. Swami Krishnananda, he says, there's no longer need. You evolve past the meditation stage when you have acknowledged, when you have realized the inseparability, in some sense self-realized, the inseparability of the individual activity and the cosmic activity. Swami Krishnananda also has this profound quote where he says, religion is God remembering himself. You know, which I was like, whoa. But in actuality, that is the game. That's what I'm speaking about, ladies and gentlemen. I'm speaking about, in some sense, how a part of humanity felt that they were an intelligence that is everywhere, and a part of humanity felt they were just an intelligence that's just here, you know? And there's various dimensions to the intelligence, because the moment the world becomes multidimensional, evidence breaks. That means if there are multiple dimensions, let's say, let's entertain the scientific idea that certain, I believe, quantum theorists, they came into this conclusion that there could be parallel realities. In one reality, again, you're combing your hair to the left. In another reality, you're combing your hair to the right. Okay? So let's imagine there are infinite parallel realities for a second. How can we just use the evidence of the movement of phenomena in one parallel reality to explain the other realities, to be sure about the other realities? This in some sense brings us to the limits of our knowledge, which is the limits of our evidence. That means they could put the greatest evidence in front of you. If you have no way of being able to recognize that evidence, then it doesn't matter if the evidence was there or not. You see? So pretty much nobody kind of noticed gravity until Isaac Newton was like, holy shit, gravity, let's call it that, you know? And of course the language was different there. I'm not really sure what Isaac Newton exactly called it, but the word gravity is what is used now. So it took us some time to be able to conceptualize various forces of the world and various phenomena in the world. However, we cannot just be dependent on the movement of phenomena in one way. It's pretty much me coming to you and saying, if I see a video of you in your childhood, I could tell exactly who you are now. You know? You know, or in some sense, I look at you, imagine I haven't met you. I see, imagine like, you know, imagine like this. Somebody doesn't know you, okay? They see a video of you, and they, based on that evidence, they 100% think they know you. Just based on seeing, like, a video of you when you were like, 10 years old or when you were young or something, they think they exactly know who you are. This is the problem of evidence in a changing world. The evidence will change as the person does. The need even for the evidence will change as the person does. So, thanks for tuning in, guys. I will read one more page from this book. It's pretty much the page to the side I read before 106. Now I will read 107. It says, "Since you will now be the master of the forces of nature, by controlling the upward flowing pranic life energy, which counteracts the forces of gravity in order that the bodily fluids and energies may circulate upwards, you will be able to walk on water, float above mud, rise above sharp objects," and so on. And by controlling the pranic life energy, which heats and digests food and provides warmth for the body, your body temperature will increase to a blazing radiance. Again, the inner moves the outer, and sometimes the outer moves the inner. They're both simultaneously here, I consider. Thanks for tuning in, guys. Much blessings and namaste.